the licenses are cheap. So, it really makes sense to have your whole organization get in there and use this as the one unifying platform for your whole company. Salesforce licenses sometimes are too expensive for people to get for everybody in the company, but Slack isn't like that.
Delighted to have Daniel Peter with us. Many of you know him from maybe events you've gone to. For those of you who don't know him, first of all, 39 certifications. He is the Salesforce practice lead at Robots and Pencils, leader of the San Francisco developer group, and obviously very active in the community. Every one of us, I think, is using it for collaboration, but it almost feels like we've got this Ferrari, but we've never got out of second gear or even first gear.
Yeah, yeah. So the collaboration tool, I think, is the thing people most know Slack for, and some people might think that's all it's for, but it's actually a platform. I mean, much in the way Salesforce is a platform, you can build with Apex and Lightning Web Components. With Slack, you have all these programmative and declarative ways to build backend functionalities, as well as a BlockKit UI to build, modals or fancy looking messages, or even an app home screen, which is kind of like a canvas in which you can do a single page app. So there really is a lot you can do with Slack beyond just collaboration. And the licenses are cheap. So, it really makes sense to have your whole organization get in there and use this as the one unifying platform for your whole company. Salesforce licenses sometimes are too expensive for people to get for everybody in the company, but Slack isn't like that. So you can build those integrations with the more expensive platforms. You can also kind of take people out of the bottleneck. So if you always have to email this person in accounting or HR to do this thing, you could actually build that on the Slack platform. And maybe you get 90, or maybe it's an 80-20 rule. So you get like 80% of the bottleneck gets solved by Slack, and then just maybe some HR has to click an approve button. Maybe not. Maybe it can just auto approve based on the parameters of what you're asking.
So this, I think, was the vision that maybe Parker talked about when they announced the Slack acquisition. That actually it was. I'm not sure if he called it the single pane of glass or whatever, but he talked about almost the Slack with the Slack integration. It was almost your way into populating Salesforce. So are you seeing customers doing that, or is that still vision?
Yeah, no, we're seeing it, but it's not. It doesn't replace Salesforce. The typical use cases are for the what they call quick work or thin work. So it's this kind of work where you're not having to really dive into a complicated UI and do a lot of analysis and things like that. It's like kind of greasing the wheels of these processes. So maybe it's alerting you when certain key things happen in Salesforce from within Slack. So instead of having to log into Salesforce every hour and refresh and see if this thing happened, it'll just tell you when it happens. So that's kind of one use case. The other is sort of getting data into Salesforce. So maybe there's a whole process in your Sales Cloud, and it only in certain steps you need to chime in and do something. Maybe populate a code on the opportunity or something like that. So it just says, hey, this person's ready to move to the next stage, but you need to put this information in. And you might say, oh shoot, I don't have that information, and you might have to go into your other system and create that record and so forth. But then you don't have to log back into Salesforce. You can just put that code in. So those little basically, I think of it as like a mental shift of gears. And when you're in thin work mode, quick work, you're not having to shift gears as much. You're not thinking deeply. You're just kind of keeping everything flowing through. It's a little bit like an assembly line, right? You're not thinking too deeply. But yeah, but if you had to do all those things in a deep work context, you're shifting gears so heavily that you're going to be much more fatigued at the end of the day and probably not even get as much work done.
So can you give me an example of thin work versus thick work? Maybe that terms maybe many people haven't heard of.
Essentially, a thick work or a deep work task is much more, you might say, single threaded. So you're focused on this one task that's takes a long time. I mean, in extreme work would be developer writing code. That's like definitely deep work. But in like a Sales Cloud context, It might be something like setting up your whole plan for how you're going to go visit all your accounts. How do you do all your routing of, you're going to be in this city, and what's the best way to visit these people. You're like focused on this one trip and planning it, and you have to think pretty hard because you're trying to optimize everything. It's like a lot of analysis and sort of problem solving and things like this, where on the other end of the spectrum, quick work, it's like an approval process, right? You're like, okay, it's $10,000 and it's a standard product. I'm just going to click approve. I don't have to think about it really. So, there's obviously some things that are kind of in between. It's not always so clear cut, but you can kind of feel when it's in between. If you're in Slack and you're like, hey, this thing's getting pretty deep here. I mean, this Slack UI is, I can't even understand it anymore. And now you can kind of feel like you're getting into that deep work, and maybe Slack isn't the best place to be doing that work actually at some point.
So this feels like, as most things, you need to do some real analysis of how your business operates, the processes, so you can then work out, where you could basically abstract some of the work into Slack, build some tiny apps, some nice little tight integrations, and suddenly accelerate things.
Totally. Yeah, that business process analysis and all that, that's more important ever with Slack. You can definitely easily build things you shouldn't in Slack that put a deep work task in Slack, or so you really want, like, your analysts and your UX people are really crucial to getting your Slack right in your company. The other thing is, I think, probably most people know, similar to Salesforce, there is sort of this clicks before code on Slack too, and there is a Slack app directory. So many of these things you might just be able to download, install, and configure. You don't When we say Slack apps, sometimes they're out of the box and configured, and sometimes they're custom, and maybe sometimes they're declaratively built. So both on the Slack end and the Salesforce end, we have some declarative capabilities to build some of these apps, or at least build workflow within Slack.
I'm sitting here, I've got Slack installed, or maybe I'm thinking about Slack. What are the steps I need to go through? Because it feels like the discussion we've just had is quite a big step away from we're using it as a collaboration tool. So if I'm just about to implement Slack, or I've got it and I know we're not using it, what are some simple steps we should be going through?
So is this total square one? Like, you don't even have it, you don't even have all your employees trained on communicating with it, or is this after that step?
No, I think for a lot of people, it's that step. We may have got it, but actually, let's assume we're not using it properly. So we actually need to take one step back to take three steps forward.
Yeah, I think you have to invest in the talent side. You need at least, depending on the size of your company, you need at least one Slack admin, and they may be just a partial time, might be a hat that they wear of many, but probably, try to get a certified Slack admin. And, there's really a matching between your company's culture, or sort of, your ideal culture you want to build, and the tools Slack gives you. So, I mean, we do a lot of cool things at Robots and Pencils. We have this is our own little thing we call Pixel Dust, where we go in there and we give each other praise. And it's such a great tool for the morale boosting and team building of within the company. So these types of concepts of what works for your company. Maybe you had a physical headquarters and now you're virtual. How can you rebuild some of those physical features? I mean, maybe you had a game room or something and you want to, rebuild that in Slack. So the admin can kind of look for those opportunities, and so they're really important, because just like pretend Slack doesn't exist. Company culture is so important. Well, okay, now we have this tool called Slack. It can actually help to build the company culture in these remote teams. And so, but the admin has to be kind of intentional about that. If you just kind of let people use it organically and see what comes out, you'll probably end up with something, but you're not putting that framework in place for all the magic to happen. So you're probably leaving some of the benefit on the table, or maybe what can happen a lot of times, people create these things in these little cliques, the private DM groups, and then the whole company doesn't get to benefit. But if you put that framework in place first, where everybody can participate, you'll get a lot more benefit out of it. So I'd say get the right talent in place that understands the company, understands Slack, and can build out, the workspace, the channel structure, configuration things sort of around like security model, like who are my, like certain, you might have a security model where certain people can add external companies, and certain people can't, as you start to do like Slack Connect and things like this. So that's the first thing, I think. And then, once you kind of get people in there, it's not a one and done. I think there's some need for something like company all hands training, where the person, say the admin that created those things is doing a little bit of repetition to make sure the company is doing it and hearing it. And then you get new people in the company, right? It's so you need to have something in place that's like a quick start for them, so they know what these channels are. And then over time you're kind of, it's going to drift and change and pivot, and new channels are going to get created. But at least if you have the core right, those changes are, just like kind of once you learn the pattern, you can repeat the pattern. So people might create new external channels, or they might use a naming convention. Maybe there's an emerging technology that everybody wants to talk about, like we're hearing a lot about, Chat GPT. So maybe you have like an emerging tech dash Chat GPT, and people just know to create the channel that way as new emerging tech comes out, things like that. So uh, there's a core and a pattern, but then you can kind of extend it in the spirit of the original.
Yeah, I can see that absolutely happening. I mean, if I think about our internal chat implementation, we've got, I know, the naming convention is event dash whatever it is. So every time we're going to another event, whether it's, I know, Midwest Dreaming or New York World Tour or TDX, there's a channel which is there. Then there's also a question about at what point do you ever get rid of a channel because it's no longer relevant. But we've got an emerging technology channel. We've got an AI Chat GPT channel, just as you said. It's a place where we can all have discussions. So it's so that approach works really well. But I think, as you said at the beginning, you need to be intentional, and this is a naming structure. Otherwise, you end up with just a million channels, and no one knows how to go and find them. So if you don't know how to do a channel, just create another one, and therefore you end up with like this bloat of channels. You end up with Slack technical debt.
And that admin can kind of, what do I want to say, like uh, do behavior modification. If people create a channel that's not exactly the way it should be, they can go back to the person who created the channel and say, oh, hey, if you make it this way, then people will be able to find it easier, and they can fix the name, or stuff like that. So that's that ongoing effort also. And like you mentioned, when to get rid of a channel, the admin can come up with those policies, and even create apps that'll do it, if they want like to do something in mass or on a schedule, that kind of stuff.
So this doesn't feel like it's replaced other communication channels. We still need to get together in person, and it can enhance the virtual working, but it's not a replacement for it for in person.
No, I mean, that's probably, some people might debate one side or the other of that, but yeah, I personally believe there's no replacement for being in person. And I talk to people all day long in Slack, and it's totally different when you go meet them in person. So yeah, I don't see it as a replacement.
So I'm looking forward to catching up with everybody at an event somewhere around the ecosystem, whether it's TDX, World Tours, or the Dreaming events. So again, thank you, Daniel, for spending some time with us. There'll be some resources in the bottom of the video so that you can dig into it a bit more deeply. You can obviously get hold of Daniel, talk to him about the stuff that they're doing at Robots and Pencils, and then of course the important thing is subscribe down there, whatever, subscribe, and make sure you don't miss out.